All right, I guess we can start since the clock on the wall says 11 o'clock. It is April Fool's Day. My name is Evan Weiner. I missed April Fool's Day by a day. I was born on April 2nd. So if I was born 8 hours earlier, I would have been a fool, but I'm not. My background, of course, is radio and TV, and I'm going back to 1939, and one of the reasons I'm going to 1939 is April 17th. In Israel, it's Holocaust Remembrance Day, and that will also be saluted in the United States as well on April the 18th. So with all that's going on in the world, I figured let's go back 84 years, and have we actually seen any movement in the last 84 years? Well, Adolf Hitler invades Poland in 1939. Madison Square Garden, the old garden on 8th Avenue and 52nd Street. About 17,000 Nazis are rallying at Madison Square Garden in 1939. Propagandist, Father Coughlin. Father Charles Coughlin is on radio spreading all kinds of stories about anti-Semitism. There were 4 wars in 1939. One of them ended the Spanish Civil War. 1939, what a shock. A Middle East failure at getting some peace. The talk of the atomic bomb starts in 1939. Anybody here go to the New York World's Fair in 1939 as a kid?
I think I remember.
You think you remember it, so you might have been there. The New York World's Fair opened in 1939. And television, commercial TV, started in 1939 on April 30th with NBC, RCA, NBC's WNBT TV, Channel 1. Gone with the Wind came out in 1939. Marian Anderson actually sung in Washington. They found a place for her to sing in Washington. The Wizard of Oz debuted in 1939. Lou Gehrig retired in 1939, suffering from what they thought was then Lou Gehrig's disease, which he might not have. But Europe goes to war. There were a bunch of wars taking place at this point. The Spanish Civil War. In Japan, the Japanese invaded China. There was a Russian-Finland war. But this is the war that would spark everything that would happen in your lives. It would change your lives. And it goes back to the end of World War I in 1918. Years of international tension and aggression, expansion by fascist Italy and Nazi Germany all culminated in the German invasion of Poland on September 1st. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The decisions that led to the war reflected the ambitions, the rivalries, the fears, the anxieties that developed in the 2 decades that followed the end of World War I. There was no closure to World War I. Hence World War II, or maybe just the next chapter in World War I. European powers were willing to go to war to extend or protect what each nation saw in dramatically different ways as matters of vital interest, great power status, international prestige, and national survival. Kaiser Wilhelm, going back to the World War I days. The First World War and its subsequent peace settlements gave rise to new ambitions, rivalries, and tensions. People had high expectation that the post-war peace settlement in 1918 would create, here's a phrase that you hear all the time, a new world order, and ensure that the slaughter of the First World War would never be repeated. And there was the Treaty of Versailles, which was brokered by the Big Four, David Lloyd George of Great Britain, Vittorio Orlando of Italy, Georges Clemenceau of France, and Woodrow Wilson of the United States. Treaty of Versailles signed June 1919. And it also created the League of Nations, an international body intended to promote peace and prevent war. But there was never an easiness about this treaty. The Allies, Britain, America, France, and Italy in those days, looked to pursue their own interest. Germany was forced to surrender territory, disarm, and pay for the war's damage. And this would all lead eventually to the creation of Nazi Germany. These divisive conditions were criticized as overly vindictive by many in Britain and America. The treaty's terms caused immediate outrage and lasting bitterness in Germany. There's an irony in all this as you take a look at Adolf Hitler. The Treaty of Versailles actually left Germany in a pretty good position because Poland was created, Czechoslovakia and the Baltic states. The treaty put buffer zones between Germany and one of its traditional rivals, the Russians. Fighting among the new states weakened them, and you talked about communism, flags, all that other stuff. And the geography of the new borders made them difficult to defend. Thus, Germany emerged from the war with smaller, relatively weaker states on its eastern border. Switzerland, Treaty of Lausanne. Although the senior statesmen stopped working personally on the conference in June 1919, the formal peace process did not end until July 1923. Treaty of Lausanne was signed by France, Britain, Italy, Japan, Greece, and Romania, and the new Republic of Turkey. So why did Hitler hate Jews? Why did he hate the Jews? You hear a lot about something today called the big lie. Something happened in Germany too, the big lie. During World War I, between 1914 and 1918, Hitler was a soldier in the German army. At the end of the war, he and many other German soldiers like him could not get over the defeat of the great German Empire. The German army command spread the myth that the army had not lost the war on the battlefield, but they were betrayed. They were betrayed. Who do you think betrayed them? Who do you think betrayed them? Why did Hitler hate Jews? By a stab in the back, as it was called at the time. Hitler bought into the big lie, the myth. Jews and communists betrayed the country and brought a left-wing government to power that wanted to throw in the towel. And he started writing about this in 1923 in Mein Kampf. That's his memoir. Kind of odd that here's a guy who only was basically in a war has a memoir. Anyway, My Struggle. Adolf Hitler predicted a general European war would result in the extermination of the Jewish race in Germany. Why did he hate Jews so much? Well, he hated Jews because he felt they betrayed him and his others. They didn't help out the Germans during the war, but also created a scapegoat. By blaming the Jews for the defeat, Hitler created a stereotypical enemy. In the 1920s and the 1930s, Germany was still in a major economic crisis. According to the Nazis, expelling the Jews was the solution to all the problems in Germany. The political message and the promise to make Germany economically strong again won Hitler the elections in 1932. Also helped with this guy a little bit by a guy named Paul van Hindenburg. On January 30, 1933, the president, Paul von Hindenburg, names Adolf Hitler leader or Führer of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, Nazi Party, as Chancellor of Germany. Hitler's plan was embraced by the German population. Do away with politics, make Germany a powerful, united, one-party state. And also, Hitler has an air force all of a sudden, the Luftwaffe. He was not supposed to have an air force. Treaty of Versailles spelled it out. Germany is not allowed to have an air force. But 1935, he is going to put together, or did put together, the Luftwaffe, German Air Force, in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Now, I do a talk on the 1936 Olympics, and I'm going to tell you that I'm in an unusual position because I actually dealt with the 3 prominent Jews who were not allowed in the 1936 Olympics. I worked with Marty Glickman in 1988 with his broadcast school. I knew Sam Stoller, who ran the Milrose Games, and I interviewed Gretel Bergman, Martha Lambert. The 1936 Olympics was given to Berlin and Germany in hopes that it would draw Germany back into the international community. Ernest Janke was an American International Olympic Committee delegate, and he was outraged, absolutely outraged, with reports what was happening within Hitler's Germany. On November 25th, 1935, he sends a letter to the IOC president, who is Count Henri Ballet-Latour, and he's suggesting that, well, the Americans should boycott the 1936 Summer Olympics. The letter said, neither Americans nor representatives of other countries can take part in the games in Nazi Germany without at least acquiescing in contempt of the Nazis for fair play and sordid exploitation of the games. The letter went unanswered. Janke was a former assistant secretary of the United States Navy. He was of German descent. And with that letter, or his call for a boycott, he is thrown out of that exclusive club called the International Olympic Committee. His spot in 1936 is taken over by Avery Brundage. December 5th, 1935, a New York judge, Judge Jeremiah Mahoney, also the head of the Amateur Athletic Union, decides he's had enough. He is calling for a boycott publicly. Mahoney was the head of the AAU, and they chose the athletes for the Olympics, for the Americans. In April 1933, an Aryan-only policy was instituted in all German athletic organizations. No Aryans, Jews or individuals with Jewish parents, or Roma, Gypsies, and they were all systematically excluded from German sports facilities and associations. Gretel Bergman went to London. She was going to train for the 1936 Olympics, despite the fact that she was Jewish. She was also the best woman athlete in Western Europe at the time. Mahoney said, there's no room for discrimination on grounds of race, color, or creed in the Olympics. The AAU voted in 1933 to accept an invitation to compete at Berlin in 1936, provided that Germany pledged that there would be no discrimination against Jewish athletes. If the pledge is not kept, I personally do not see why we should compete. Anybody been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington? Nobody? You have. You probably didn't notice this, but Jeremiah Mahoney has a little plaque at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., talking about this. He is honored by the American Holocaust Museum in Washington for speaking out against Hitler as early as 1935. This guy, Franklin Roosevelt, did not speak out against Hitler. There was no bully pulpit pressure. Roosevelt urged the American team to go to Berlin. And I once talked to Marty Glickman about that. He said, I had no problems going to Berlin. He said, I was going to go to Berlin, and I was going to win the gold medal in the 4x100 relay, get up on that podium with Sam Stoller, and shove that medal right into the Fuhrer's face, saying, we're Jews from New York, we're better than you. Unfortunately, he never had the shot. For the first time in the modern history of the Olympic Games, people in the United States and Europe called for the boycott of the Olympics because of what later would become known as human rights abuses. And there is Germany during the Olympics, and Avery Brundage, who was the head of the U.S. committee. Brundage had certain assurances from Hitler that all's good, no problem, we'll treat the Jews fine. And Brundage attacks the Jews of the United States. Certain Jews must understand they cannot use these games as a weapon in their boycott against the Nazis, who labeled the anti-Olympic campaign a Jewish communist conspiracy. I wonder where he got that from. Didn't Hitler say the same thing about why the Germans lost World War I? Some American newspapers called Brundage a Nazi stooge. I'll just call him a stooge. That's what he was. The games, they were in Berlin. In 1936, the Nazi regime tried to camouflage its violent racist past while hosting the Summer Olympics. I had a guy in Stamford, Connecticut about 10 years ago. His family sent him to London in 1933. He was going to see his father in Prague. They had moved to Prague. And he said he took the train going through Germany prior to the Summer Olympics. No problem. After the Summer Olympics, you dirty Jew bastard again, and they spit at him. He went to Columbia University around 1941 and stayed in the United States. Most anti-Jewish signs were temporarily removed, and newspapers toned down their harsh rhetoric. It's all an illusion. The illusion. The Berlin Games presented to foreign spectators and journalists with a false image of a peaceful, tolerant Germany. The kind of Germany, Adolf Hitler having a song in his heart. Germany did score its propaganda coup. 49 nations sent teams to the games, legitimized the Hitler regime both in the eyes of the world and the German domestic audiences. Sam Stoller didn't say very much about not being able to participate in the Olympics because he was pulled by the coach Dean Cromwell along with Marty Glickman. Gretel Bergman did not compete in the 1936 Olympics, even though she went along with the German team. There's a great documentary called Hitler's Pawn that came out HBO in 2004, and I said to her, "Why'd you do it?" I had to give my people hope. I knew I was never going to perform, but you got to understand what was going on. They were taking everything away from us, our jobs, our homes, our livelihoods, our families. She got out in 1937, so she wasn't there for a crystal ball. November 9th and 10th, 1938, Nazi leaders unleashed a series of pogroms against the Jewish population in Germany and recently incorporated territories like Czechoslovakia. The event was to be called Kristallnacht, the Night of the Broken Glass, because of the shattered glass that littered the streets after the vandalism and destruction of Jewish-owned businesses, synagogues, and homes. Meanwhile, there's still hope. At least Neville Chamberlain had some hope that we will be able to avoid this war. He is the Prime Minister of England, and he is going to meet with the Fuhrer Adolf Hitler. Neville Chamberlain is best known for his role in the Munich Agreement of 1938, which ceded parts of Czechoslovakia to Hitler. Chamberlain flies to Berlin on September 15, 1938, in an attempt to secure the peace. Czechoslovakian leaders were neither present nor consulted, but it was made clear they would receive no support if they declined the terms. The deal was done on September 30th, 1938. Chamberlain, believing he had averted war, proclaimed, "Peace in our time, for our time, peace for our time," to a crowd on his arrival in England. Calendar turns to 1939, Hermann Göring. It's January 24th, 1939, and it's time to get rid of the Jews. This is what Nazi Germany planned out. Well, on January 24th, they were doing the job prior to that. The second in command is Hermann Göring, and he authorizes security police, the SS, and the SD chief, Reinhard Hendrik, to coordinate solutions for the forced immigration of Jews from the Greater German Reich and to establish a central office for Jewish immigration in Berlin. Hitler, 1939. Time to get rid of the Jews. On January 30th, Hitler declares, in the event of another world war, for which he intended to hold international finance Jewry responsible. The result would not be the Bolshevization of the earth, and with the victory of Jewry, but rather the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. And Hitler is on the march, or as Mel Brooks said, Hitler is on tour in Springtime for Hitler in the Producers movie. On March 24th, under German pressure, Slovakia declares its independence from the Czechoslovak state. On March 15th, German troops enter the remaining territory of Czechoslovakia, occupying the Czech provinces and establishing the protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. Meanwhile, in England, they start preparing for war. The Military Training Act, and the guy reading the newspapers that are on the fence. On April 27th, the British government announced plans to conscript young men for military training. It was a dramatic departure. Britain is about ready to go to war. Well, Adolf Hitler is looking for allies, and he finds one in Benito Mussolini. The Pact of Steel deal. Now, remember, Italy and Germany were not on the same side, but Mussolini is looking at the landscape and figures, well, why not? The Pact of Steel, or the Pact of Friendship, and the alliance between Germany and Italy was a military and political alliance between the two countries, and that's signed on May 22nd. How many of you know the history of the ship, the St. Louis? 1, 2, 3. That's about it. We don't talk about this much. We should. America, the home of the free, home of the brave. Statue of Liberty. Come, right? Statue of Liberty said come. Between May 13th and June 17th, more than 900 refugees are aboard the St. Louis. Most of them are Jewish. They leave Hamburg, Germany for Cuba. They're hoping to receive entry visas to the United States. Cuba and the United States would refuse to accept the refugees, forcing them to return to Europe. The United States and Canada were unwilling to admit the passengers. St. Louis passengers were finally permitted to land in Western countries rather than to return to Nazi Germany. A total of 254 St. Louis passengers were killed in the Holocaust. There is the book. Well, no is no. We're not letting you in. No is no. Franklin Roosevelt, his administration, didn't allow the passengers to land. They didn't have U.S. immigration visas and had not passed a security screening. Franklin Roosevelt ignored the plight of the passengers and the ship. The St. Louis in Belgium. The United States in 1924 passed an Immigration Act. The Immigration Act was basically aimed at Eastern Europeans, to keep Eastern Europeans out of the United States. If you were Scandinavian, you're from England, you were fine, you were okay. But we didn't want those Eastern Europeans in the United States. So the U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act of 1924 strictly limited the number of immigrants who could be admitted to the United States each year. Well, while this is all going on, New York City of all places, is hosting a rally by the German-American Bund. The German-American Bund was an organization. How many of you are familiar with the Bund? You are, okay. An organization of ethnic Jews living in the United States, pro-Nazi stance. 1939 America, we had Nazis here. The Bund's program included anti-Semitism, strong anti-communist sentiments, and the demand that the United States remain neutral in approaching the European conflict. Well, they decided to have a garden party, Madison Square Garden, pro-American rally, mass demonstration for true Americanism, February 20th, 1939, Madison Square Garden, German-American Bund. New York City, 8th Avenue, 53rd Street, 17,000 Nazis are in town. They had German-American Bund activities led to clashes, including street battles with other groups, most notably Jewish war veterans of World War I. When I speak in New Jersey in the Oranges, they tell me there was a Bund community, I think it was in Orange or maybe East Orange, New Jersey. There might have been one in Glen Rock, New Jersey as well. It is February 20th, and the rally is held to proclaim the rights of white Gentiles, the true patriots. 20,000 people, they claimed 20,000 people. They booed Franklin Roosevelt's name and chanted, Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler. They were led by this guy, Fritz Kuhn. Public opinion surveys in 1939 showed that Fritz Kuhn, the leader of the German-American Bund, was seen by the U.S. public as the leading anti-Semite in the country. Actual membership figures for the German-American Bund was not known with certainty, but maybe 25,000 due-paying members and 8,000 uniformed stormtroopers in the United States. Shortly after the rally, the Bund rapidly declined. The Bund came under investigation. There was a seizure of the financial records on the raid of the group's headquarters in Yorkville, part of Manhattan. And authorities discovered that $14,000 raised by the Bund in the rally was unaccounted for because Kuhn spent it on his mistress and other expenses. Kuhn was convicted of embezzlement in December 1939 and ended up in Sing Sing prison. Father Coughlin. There has been an unfortunate tradition in American media which continues to this day to spread the big lie. And Father Coughlin, who was put on the air by a guy by the name of G.A. Richards, who owned radio stations in Detroit and in Cleveland, well, he was the propagandist of his time. The Reverend Charles E. Coughlin was born in 1891. He died in 1979. He was Canadian-born, Hamilton, Ontario. He was a Roman Catholic priest who ended up in Detroit, actually the suburb of Royal Oak, Michigan. I speak by Zoom at the Royal Oak Library these days about these topics. But he was a radio celebrity. His sermons aired on Sunday and featured populist, anti-communist, and anti-Semitic claims. At the peak of his popularity, he had about 40 million devoted listeners weekly. He linked Jews to the creation and spread of communism, an ideology he hated. He also frequently utilized literary and religious references to spread anti-Semitic stereotypes. And that is his magazine. It is called Social Justice, The Jewish Question, right under there, by Dr. J.S. Barnes. And this is Coughlin's magazine that he put out and that people got. Although it had proven to have been a hoax, Coughlin published the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, an anti-Semitic pamphlet purportedly providing evidence of an international Jewish conspiracy to control the world in multiple issues of social justice in 1938. After World War II began in September, Coughlin urged his followers to oppose any loosening of immigration restrictions, to protest any American involvement in the war, which he predicted would end with a victory for Adolf Hitler. Make a long story short about Coughlin. Coughlin was nearly arrested on the Espionage Act in 1942, and the church told him to get rid of the radio show when he continued at his parish until the mid-1960s. Stalin, Hitler, come up with a deal. The Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact was signed on August 23rd, along with a secret protocol that left Hitler free to attack Poland without risking war with the Soviet Union. And where did most of the Jews of Eastern Europe live? Poland. Without risking war with the Soviet Union, and divided Eastern Germany into German and Soviet spheres of influence. Well, there's Mussolini and there's Hitler. In response to the Nazi-Soviet pact, Britain and Poland entered into a formal military alliance on August 25th. Chamberlain was still looking for a peaceful solution, but Britain is preparing for war. The next few days are marked by frantic attempts to reach a settlement. Mussolini told Hitler that despite their military alliance, Italy would not fight. Hitler offered to guarantee the safety of the British Empire, but emphasized the need to solve the crisis over Poland. Gee, what crisis was he talking about in Poland? On August 29th, Hitler presented the British ambassador, Sir Neville Henderson, with a set of minimum conditions for settlement, which include conceding both Danzig and the corridor. The German invasion of Poland began at 4:45 in the morning on September 1st. This is another war being fought, the fourth. And the war is on. The war is on. Neville Chamberlain broadcast an announcement to the nation on at 11:15 a.m. on September 3rd. British ultimatum demanding that Germany withdraw its troops from Poland had been delivered earlier that morning and expired at 11 o'clock without a reply. Again, for the second time in what is now 25 years, Britain and Germany are at war. Neville Chamberlain goes to war. Germany represented a direct threat to British security and the security of its empire. Accepting German domination of Europe had grave implications for British status and survival. Britain went to war in 1939 to defend the balance of power in Europe and safeguard Britain's position in the world. Meanwhile, back in America, you have the Bund meetings, you have Father Coughlin, and you have a whole bunch of people saying we've got to stay isolated. Some of these signs say, I didn't raise my boy to die for Britain. Remember Dunkirk. Benedict Arnold tried the treason, send Halifax to Halifax. Mother's Crusade. People against the war. The Neutrality Act of 1935 prohibited exporting arms and ammunition to any foreign nation at war. In 1937, a new Neutrality Act prohibited Americans from traveling on ships owned by any belligerent nation and declared that American-owned ships could not carry any arms intended for war zones. In 1938, 20 years after the end of World War I, 70% of Americans polled believed that the United States participation in that war was a mistake. Well, Germany had invaded Poland. You got a war in Europe, but it's only called the emergency. The emergency. The invasion on September 1st, 2 days later the war is declared, and according to the United States, it's just an emergency. Americans who were polled immediately after the war overwhelmingly hoped for the defeat of Germany, but more than 90% opposed getting involved in the war. A majority did not want to join the fight, even if Nazi Germany defeated Great Britain and France. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the Pacific, that's Chiang Kai-shek, Japan invades China. This war started in 1937. China had resisted. Japan had really started influencing the territory in 1931. Roosevelt is keeping a close eye on what is happening in China because it's an American ally. George Elsler really wanted to kill Hitler. And if his timing was better, the world might have changed. It's November 8th. It's the 16th anniversary of Hitler's beer hall putsch. A bomb explodes after Hitler had given the speech. He was unharmed. He finished 12 minutes earlier and left the hall. 7 people were killed, 63 wounded, but not Hitler. And there was another war that's winding down. November 30th, following a series of ultimatums and failed negotiations, the Soviet Red Army launched an invasion of Finland with 500,000 troops. The Soviets wanted Finnish land because the country wanted to set up Soviet military bases on Finnish land. The end of the Spanish Civil War takes place in 1939. That had started in July 1936. A rebel coup took place against the elected Republicans by the military-supported nationalists. The nationalists were supported by Italy and Germany, while the Republicans were supported by the USSR. The end of the war, Franco there, the country was split in two by opposing sides, and by 1937 the nationalists gained control of many of the northern provinces. They kept pushing north, forcing much of the Republican Army to flee to France by the end of 1938. The war end is near. Franco was appointed head of the Nationalist Army and Chief of State in late 1936. By November of that year, the Nationalist forces made it to outside of Madrid and began the siege of the capital. On March 28th, Nationalists captured Madrid. Franco announced the nationalist victory on April 1st, April Fool's Day, 84 years ago. There were many atrocities committed by both sides. Executions and death squads were rampant, and those who showed opposition to the cause on either side were often killed. Estimated death toll, about 500,000 people. Nearly the same amount of people fled the country. The White Paper of 1939. This was a policy paper issued by the British government, led by Neville Chamberlain, in response to the 1936 through 39 Arab revolt in Palestine. It went nowhere. What a shock. You know, the Brits decided that they were going to take care of the Middle East with the Balfour Declaration around 1917. What they did was screw everything over. They screwed over the Arabs, the Israelis, the Palestinians, and they created the mess back then. They had no plan. They were going to appease everybody and ended up appeasing nobody. That goes nowhere. There's Einstein. Talk about the atomic bomb starting in early 1939 that German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann had discovered fission, prompted fears that Germany might find or might develop an atomic bomb. Among those who were concerned, Leo Szilard, who contacted some fellow scientists, including Edward Teller and Eugene Wigner, to plan an appropriate course of action. Scientists decided that Albert Einstein would be the ideal person to send out a warning of the German threat. Szilard spoke with Alexander Sachs, an economist and a close friend of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Sachs recommended that they write to FDR. FDR gets interested in an atomic bomb. The letter was taken seriously. Franklin Roosevelt quickly established an advisory uranium committee. Hollywood begins to take notice of Nazi Germany in 1939. The first spoof of Nazi Germany would be in 1940 by the Three Stooges. The Three Stooges of all people. I'm working on my Jewish comedian talk, which I have to have done in a couple of weeks. And I said, before there was Mort Saul, before there was Lenny Bruce, before there was Jon Stewart, there was the Three Stooges as satire comedians. Anyway, but that's next year. It's another talk later on. Confessions of a Nazi Spy was an American spy political thriller directed by Anatoly Litvak for Warner Brothers. It was the first explicitly anti-Nazi film to be produced by a major Hollywood studio, the Warner Brothers, all Jewish. It was released in May 1939, several months before the beginning of World War II. So how many of you think you went to the World's Fair in 1939? You did?
Absolutely.
How old are you? You must have been a little kid.
I was about 12 or 13.
About 12 or 13. Did you get on TV?
Yeah,
If you went into the pavilion, they sometimes pulled boys in and girls to be on TV, getting their parents home, so you missed it. Anyway, the New York World's Fair, 84 years ago, the theme of the fair was Building the World of Tomorrow. It opened on April 30th, the 150th anniversary of the inauguration of George Washington in New York City, the nation's first capital. And Franklin Roosevelt was there, welcoming people to the World's Fair. Not only was he welcoming people in person, but if you were one of the 1,000 people who owned televisions around New York, you got to see him on Channel 1. He was the first person ever to be on commercial TV in the United States. He gave the opening speech while an estimated 1,000 visitors watched the opening on 200 television sets around the World's Fair. FDR was the first president to give a speech that's broadcast on television. And there it is. We're going to talk about that here in a second. There it is. If you went into that pavilion, if you were a little kid, somebody might pull you out, tell your parents, we want to put them on TV. I had a guy about 5 years ago out in Westbury tell me that he was on TV. He was like 8 years old, and his parents, where are you taking me? Don't worry, we're taking him right there. You'll see him on TV in a minute. And there he was on TV. And I said to him, did you get a video copy? He said, what? I said, don't worry, they didn't have any copies in those days. RCA introduced television to the American public at the 1939 World's Fair. Before the fair, they published a brochure for their dealers to explain television. NBC began regularly scheduled broadcasts after the opening ceremonies on WNBT Channel 1. And this is what they gave out. What television will mean to you when they say you can watch baseball games in your house. You can watch an orchestra in your house. You can watch a fight in your house. You never have to leave your house again. It'll all be on TV. One of the first guys to get involved on the ground floor in TV, both in England and in the United States, Walt Disney. Now, how many of you, when you were kids, watched cartoons on TV? Yeah, okay, you watch cartoons on TV. And if it's a Disney cartoon, who do you think you're going to get? Mickey Mouse? Anybody else?
Bugs Bunny.
Now, Bugs Bunny was Warner Brothers. Donald Duck? Goofy? Pluto? Minnie? Nah, you didn't get any of those. You got him, Gus Goose. Gus Goose. No? You don't know who Gus Goose is? He's Donald Duck's cousin. See, I didn't know that the goose and the duck could be cousins. But anyway, May 19th, the Walt Disney cartoons, Donald's Cousin Gus, on the NBC experimental station W2XBS, or later WNBC TV in New York. It was the first time a movie cartoon was televised in the United States. August 26th, the first Major League Baseball game is televised, a doubleheader between the Cincinnati Reds and the Brooklyn Dodgers at Ebbets Field in Brooklyn. That's the cover of my book called America's Passion, How a Coal Miner's Game Became the NFL in the 20th Century. And that guy who's getting, that must have hurt unless he's got protective. That has to hurt when you get a fist right here. Boom. Anyway, that's the cover of my book. I went to the dirtiest cover I could get for football, and that was it. NBC did the first football game back in 1939 on October 22nd. The game was available to about 1,000 TV sets in the New York City area. Okay, how many of you saw Gone with the Wind? Like the movie? Did you like the movie?
I've seen it
You
10
did.
times at least.
Yeah, but you didn't like it. Why didn't you like it?
More. I didn't like
He had to break it up.
blacks, the whole thing was.
Yeah.
So they have to break it up into two.
You didn't like it because of the way they portrayed blacks. You didn't like it because it was way too long. It was way too long. But you know what? How many of you watched Channel 9 in the old days, the $1 Million Movie? The theme of the $1 Million Movie was the theme from Gone with the Wind. And Channel 9 showed about 5 movies a week, about 9 times a week in those days. Anyway, Gone with the Wind was adapted from the 1936 novel by Margaret Mitchell, set in the American South against the backdrop of the American Civil War and Reconstruction era. The film tells the story of Scarlett O'Hara, the daughter of a Georgia plantation owner, following her romantic pursuit of Ashley Wilkes, who frankly didn't give a damn, who's married to his cousin Melanie Hamilton in her subsequent marriage to Rhett Butler. I think it was Rhett Butler who frankly didn't give a damn. But there were protests. There were protests about what you talked about, how they portrayed blacks. You'd Be Sweet Too under a whip, and here's the protest. The film was criticized by black commentators since its release for its depiction of black people and the whitewashing of the issue of slavery. Initially, American newspapers controlled by whites did not cover the criticism. Hattie McDaniel won an Academy Award for her role in Gone with the Wind, but she couldn't go to the opening in Atlanta. It was at the Lowe's Grand Theater on Peachtree Street in Atlanta on December 15th, but because of Jim Crow, Georgia's segregation laws, Hattie McDaniel was not allowed to be part of the opening of the movie. Marian Anderson. You know who Marian Anderson is, right? Right? Yeah. Well, she wanted to sing in Washington. She had a problem. On Easter Sunday, Marian Anderson gave a free concert on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial after being denied the opportunity to perform at Washington, D.C.'s Constitutional Hall. She, of course, was African American. And Constitutional Hall had a white artist-only policy. The Daughters of the American Revolution ran the place, explained, "The rules governing the use of Constitution Hall are in accordance with the policy of theaters, auditoriums, hotels, and public schools of the District of Columbia. No concert." Well, Eleanor Roosevelt got wind of this. She wasn't too happy about this at all. She had a newspaper column called My Day. And in that column, she said she's leaving the Daughters of American Revolution because she is going to protest their segregational stance. Anderson and her supporters considered giving a free, open-air concert in a small park in front of Constitutional Hall. But they get a better idea. It's March. Better idea. Why don't I sing at the Lincoln Memorial? Yeah, that's what I want to do. I'm going to sing at the Lincoln Memorial. But she has to get permission, right? Well, you know, the NAACP and her manager, Sol Urick, said, let's do it. Let's do it. But they couldn't do it because it's parkland. So Anderson has to meet, and her people have to meet with FDR's people like Harold Ickes. The Lincoln Memorial was under control of Harold Ickes, the Secretary of the Interior. And before the liberal Ickes could sign off on the concert, he needed approval from Franklin Roosevelt. FDR was very cautious about racial matters during his previous two runs in 1932 and 1936, and he said yes, probably because Eleanor pressured him. And she gave the concert in front of the Lincoln Memorial. It's April 9th, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. 75,000 people are there. She sang America and Ave Maria, and a few black spirituals to commemorate Easter. She told the audience, "I'm just so overwhelmed today, I cannot express myself. You don't know what you have done for me." How many like The Wizard of Oz? We're off to see The Wizard of Oz. Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It's 84 years, right? And that song still maintains popularity, which is kind of amazing, isn't it? 84-year-old songs don't last that long. When The Wizard of Oz came out, Oz was neither commercially nor critically successful. Judy Garland, Yip Harburg, who is one of my favorite composers, and Harold Arlen won Oscars, but the film lost money at the box office, dismissed by critics as having no trace of imagination, good taste, or integrity, New Yorker magazine, and also being filled with freak characters, the New Republic. Well, who had the last laugh? Wizard of Oz or the critics? Lou Gehrig, on July 4th, on Lou Gehrig Appreciation Day, the stricken Yankee, longtime Yankee first baseman uttered the famous words at home plate at the ceremony at Yankee Stadium. For the past 2 weeks, you've been reading about a bad break, yet today I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. Except, he didn't really say that. The 1939 legacy. Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 1st, 1941. America declared war on Japan on December 8th, 1941. Hitler and Mussolini declared war on the United States on December 11th, 1941. Hitler and Mussolini. In 2018, a forensic study of the remains by Russian intelligence for 7 decades determined with World War II lost by the Germans, Adolf Hitler killed himself at his Berlin bunker on April 30th, 1945. On April 28th, 1945, Il Duce, Benito Mussolini, and his mistress, Clara Petacci, are shot by Italian partisans who captured the couple as they attempted to flee to Switzerland. This is in Lower Manhattan. This was an exhibit, and the exhibit was, where did the Nazis go after World War II? What happened to them? Before I get into what happened to them, let's talk about 21st century, this decade. In 2021, a survey, 1 in 10 young Americans believe that the Holocaust never happened. 23% thought it's a myth, or that the number of those killed has been exaggerated. 6 million killed. In a 50-state survey of Americans aged between 18 and 39, 12% said they never heard or thought they never heard the word Holocaust. In August 2022, the Keller Independent School District in Texas pulled Anne Frank's diary adaptation, Anne Frank's diary, from school bookshelves. The book is read in German schools, required reading in German schools. 1939 legacy. Oh, by the way, where did the Nazis go? At least 1,600 went to America. They were scientists and others, like Werner von Braun, father of the United States space program, but they were brought in for military needs. A lot of them went to Argentina. Rat lines were established because Juan Perón wanted the brain power from the Nazis. Some went to England, some went to Russia. That is the Enola Gay, the plane that dropped the atomic bomb. That's in a museum outside the Dulles Airport in Dulles, Virginia. The Einstein letter led to the formation of the Manhattan Project to develop an American atomic bomb. The Germans never got a bomb. In Hiroshima, as many as 140,000 people ultimately died from the atomic bomb blast. But not all immediately perished. The residual health issues caused by intense radioactive fallout claimed thousands of lives in the months and years afterwards as well. The day after the Nagasaki bombing, the president, Harry S. Truman, issued his first affirmative command regarding the bomb. No more strikes without his express authorization. Truman never issued the order to drop the bombs. That was a military decision. But he did issue the order to stop dropping them. At his St. Petersburg, Russia, back in 2011, the end of World War II saw the United States and the Soviet Union relationship crumble, with the Cold War starting in 1946. 1,600 Nazi scientists and others would move to America to work on defense programs and the space program, including Werner von Braun. The hunt for Nazis was global and is still open, even though the Nazis now are nearing 100 years old, if they can find them. China, free of Japan, would see a civil war, become a communist country in 1949. Hammer and sickle, train station, St. Petersburg, Russia. Soviet Union did fall in 1991, lasted 74 years, but problems remained between the United States and the successor Russia. The Middle East problems, far from being resolved. 1948, a Jewish state, Israel, was established, which led to the first of many Middle East wars. Father Coughlin ended his radio career in May 1940. 2 years later, the United States government considered charging Coughlin with violating the Espionage Act by publishing enemy propaganda in social justice. Father Coughlin was the originator of hate radio in the United States, and the man who hired him in Detroit, G.A. Richards, defended him in his fight to keep his radio station licenses, as Richards was accused of promoting anti-Semitism. And of course, that is social justice. Jews put pressure on Wilkie to hit at Father Coughlin. The Catholic hierarchy in Detroit ordered Coughlin to cease all non-pastoral activities or risk being excommunicated. He continued as a parish priest at the Shrine of the Little Flower until his retirement in 1966. He died in October 1979 of illness. In 1968, he claimed he could have continued as the people would have supported me, but I didn't have the heart left. My church had spoken. Spain, it's Cadiz, Spain. Francisco Franco would hang on to power until his death in 1975. Franco rescued many Jews. How many Jews were saved by the Franco government during World War II is a matter of historical controversy. He's been credited with saving somewhere between 30,000, yes?
I was one.
You were one of the Jews that Franco saved?
We were able to go through Spain to get to Cuba.
Where were you initially born?
I was born in Germany.
You were
and
born
then-
in Germany, then went to Spain?
No, then we went to Holland,
You
and we
went-
fled Holland and had passage through Spain.
So you went from Holland to Spain,
Yeah,
and Franco let you go.
obviously.
You're the first person I've ever met, that Franco freed. So there you go. So anyway, between 30 or 60,000 of your fellow Jews might have gotten out, but many suggest 45,000 did, and you were one of the 45,000. Franco didn't recognize Israel's statehood, maintained strong relations with the Arab world. It's a contradiction here. On December 16, 1968, the Spanish government formally revoked the 1492 Edict of Expulsion against the Spanish Jewish population. Boy, Mel Brooks could have thrown that into History of the World Part 1 a little differently. Generalissimo Francisco Franco is still dead was a gag used by Saturday Night Live between 1975 and 1977. That sign here says no Nazis. That's in the former East Germany where I was. After the war ended in 1945, the Allies occupied Germany, outlawed the Nazi Party, and worked to purge its influence from every aspect of German life. Germany has strict laws on banning political parties, and only 2 have been outlawed since the defeat of the Nazis at the end of World War II, the neo-Nazi Socialist Reich Party in 1952 and the German Communist Party in 1956. That would be West Germany, basically. Frankly, I don't give a damn. There you go, Clark Gable. In 2020, Warner Media removed Gone with the Wind from its streaming platform, HBO Max, for 2 weeks. HBO Max said the 1939 film was a product of its time and depicted ethnic and racial prejudice that were wrong then and are wrong today. When the movie returned to the platform, a disclaimer, video introduction discussed the movie's history and put into context 1939-1940 entertainment. When Hattie McDaniel took the stage at the 12th Academy Awards in Los Angeles, she was the only black woman in the room at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, which was a segregated hotel. They got her in. She left the room with an Oscar for the Best Supporting Actress. March on Washington. The March on Washington, right? 24 years later. On January 20, 1957, Marian Anderson sang for President Dwight D. Eisenhower's inaugural. On January 20, 1961, she sang for President John F. Kennedy's inaugural. Anderson was active in supporting the civil rights movement during the 1960s. In 1963, she sang at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, where the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech. Well, there's Dorothy. That's the good witch, right? That's the good witch. What's her name? Glenda? Is that her name? Glenda? I'm not familiar with Wizard of Oz names and all that, but I do know that's Dorothy. Wizard of Oz languished. Nobody really wanted anything to do with it until 1956. It was shown on TV. It became an annual affair, and because it was shown on TV to a different generation of kids, it became beloved. Television did change people's lives. Entertainment was now in the living room. Gary Cooper. Lou Gehrig died in 1941 from ALS, but there is some question as to whether it was ALS or something else caused by head injuries he suffered while playing football at Columbia University. That question remains unresolved and will always remain unresolved. Here he is, being honored, Lou Gehrig, in 1939. But a funny thing happened to I'm the luckiest man on the face of the earth. Very funny thing. Back in those days, the newsreels were a big deal, but there were no newsreels at Yankee Stadium. Newsreels did record the words that day, but they didn't preserve them. Only 4 lines of the speech have survived. No written version exists. No newspaper transcribed it. It has lived on through Gary Cooper's performance as Lou Gehrig in the movie Pride of the Yankees. Any questions, any comments? It's your turn to talk.
It was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was so great.
Thank you. So that's it? Nobody else wants to talk about it?